Amen. Well, today is Red Words 9. We're in Matthew chapter 11 as we're working our way through the words of Christ in red. Matthew chapter 11. You follow along as I read out loud. Matthew chapter 11, beginning in verse 1. Now it came to pass, when Jesus had finished commanding his 12 disciples, that he departed from there to teach and to preach in their cities. And when John had heard in prison about the works of Christ, he sent 2 of his disciples and said to him, "Are you the coming one, or do we look for another?" And Jesus answered and said to them, "Go and tell John the things which you see and hear. The blind see, and the lame walk, the lepers are cleansed, and the deaf hear, the dead are raised up, and the poor have the gospel preached to them. And blessed is he who is not offended because of me." And as they departed, Jesus began to say to the multitudes concerning John, "What did you go out into the wilderness to see? A reed shaken by the wind? But what did you go out to see? A man clothed in soft garments? Indeed, those who wear soft clothing are in kings' houses. But what did you go out to see? A prophet? Yes. And I say to you, and more than a prophet. For this is he of whom it is written, 'Behold, I send my messenger before your face, who will prepare your way before you.' And assuredly I say to you, among those born of women there has not risen one greater than John the Baptist. But he who is least in the kingdom of heaven is greater than he. And from the days of John the Baptist until now, the kingdom of heaven suffers violence, and the violent take it by force. For all the prophets and the law prophesied until John. And if you're willing to receive it, he is Elijah who is to come. And he who has ears to hear, let him hear. But to what shall I liken this generation? It's like children sitting in the marketplaces and calling to their companions and saying, 'We played the flute for you, and you did not dance. We mourned to you, and you did not lament.' For John came neither eating nor drinking, and they say he has a demon. And the Son of Man came eating and drinking, and they say, 'Look, a glutton and a winebibber, a friend of tax collectors and sinners.' But wisdom is justified by her children." Well, then he began to rebuke the cities in which most of his mighty works had been done, because they did not repent. "Woe to you, Chorazin! Woe to you, Bethsaida! For if the mighty works which were done in you had been done in Tyre and Sidon, they would have repented long ago in sackcloth and ashes. But I say to you, it will be more tolerable for Tyre and Sidon in the day of judgment than for you. And you, Capernaum, who are exalted to heaven, will be brought down to Hades. For if the mighty works which were done in you had been done in Sodom, it would have remained until this day. But I say to you that it shall be more tolerable for the land of Sodom in the day of judgment than for you." And at that time Jesus answered and said, "I thank you, Father, Lord of heaven and earth, that you have hidden these things from the wise and prudent and have revealed them to babes. Even so, Father, for so it seemed good in your sight. And all things have been delivered to me by my Father. And no one knows the Son except the Father, nor does anyone know the Father except the Son. And to the one to whom the Son wills to reveal him, come to me, all you who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you, and learn from me. For I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy, and my burden is light. Lord, I pray that you'd bless the reading of your word and speak through me. In Jesus' name, amen. Well, in verse 1 of this chapter, Jesus gives them their assignments. He sent them out last week in twos. He said, don't take a lot of supplies. It's just like a short-term little mission trip, guys. And he sent them out in twos. But this week, he gives them their assignments, and then he just leaves them. He doesn't point them in different directions. He just leaves and goes preaching and teaching in all of their hometowns. Why? Because the prophet isn't welcome in his own hometown. So Jesus said, I'll go to your hometowns and make it easier on you guys, and because they can't really hear it from you. And there's an application for us today, guys. Jesus still goes where we cannot. Maybe you have people that you've shared the gospel with in your family, and they won't listen. Hey, Jesus will go to them. They can't hear it from you, but they can hear it from someone else through the power of the Spirit of Jesus. He'll send someone to preach the gospel to them. In verses 2 and 3, we see that John the Baptist is now doubting whether his cousin Jesus is in fact the Messiah. Now think about how wild that is. I mean, he grew up as a cousin of Jesus, right? I mean, how many times do you think when the whole family reunion was at Jerusalem at Passover, did you hear these stories about your cousin Jesus? He never does anything wrong. Your cousin Jesus always cleans his room. Why can't you be more like your cousin Jesus? I mean, he never backtalks his mom or his stepfather Joseph. Why can't you be more like your cousin Jesus? I mean, how many times had John heard something like that? And even when Jesus came to be baptized, John said, I'm not worthy. You should be baptizing me, cousin. And Jesus said, permit it to be so. We want to please the Father here. The Father wants this to happen, so let's do this. And when he baptized him, he brought him back up out of the water. The Spirit of God descended like a dove, and a voice from heaven said, this is my beloved Son. I mean, John has seen a lot of amazing stuff with his cousin Jesus. He's heard the reports about all the healings and the Bible studies and all of this. How could he doubt that Jesus is Messiah? When you've been in a dungeon for 10 months, you begin to reevaluate everything. Things look different from a dungeon, don't they? You see, he was waiting for God to do what he promised, that God's going to set up his kingdom through this Messiah. He knew he was the forerunner that was preparing the way for Jesus. But all of this was not playing out the way John thought it was going to play out. I think John assumed that Jesus would already be taking on the Romans and setting up all kinds of... Well, wait a minute, he's just going around teaching and everything, and he's real humble. He's not a real leader's leader. And how in the world did I get in the mess that I'm in? I'm just calling out sin because this leader is taking his brother's wife, and she's got it out for me and everything. So now I'm in prison, and I pray. How many times do you think John, in his dungeon prison cell, said, God, if I'm doing something wrong, if that's why I'm here, I just want to confess everything I know to confess? And he confessed, and he confessed, and he confessed, and he confessed. I'm sure he had a good time of confession to God there. And then he woke up the next morning still in a damp, cold, smelly dungeon. So he confesses more. And he's still there. His disciples come and check on him, and, well, what's my cousin Jesus doing? Well, he's basically just going around teaching people stuff, but he's not really challenging Caesar or Rome or anything like that. What? Nothing played out the way he thought it was going to play out. So he's having a crisis of belief. Say those three words with me. Crisis of belief. You know what that is? That's what some of you are having right now. A crisis of belief. I said yes to God. I assumed it was all going to get easier or better or just, I don't know what I expected, but I expected it to be something different than what I'm getting right now. How come I'm still in a kind of a mess here, right? Crisis of belief. John is, he's just doubting everything. If you've not been in one of these, I guarantee you, as a Christian, one is coming for you. It is a necessary place of growth, of character refining, of deepening and producing endurance and hope and all of the things that we need as Christians. I mean, how many of you have already had a crisis of faith? Crisis of belief. See? If you've been a Christian for any time at all, I mean, God just takes you through this growth episode in which he says, listen, I know it doesn't look the way you think it ought to look. I know it's not going down the way you think it ought to go down. I know things are not playing out the way you thought they were going to play out. But will you still trust me? Will you still get up and have your quiet time? And will you go out and do the things that I've called you to do on a day-to-day basis? See? It's kind of like what Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego said to Nebuchadnezzar. Our God is able to deliver us from this fiery furnace, but even if he doesn't, we're still not going to bow down to that idol. Now, as they said those words, I'm sure they're thinking God's about to do something. But God didn't do anything. And so the guards are poking them with the spears in the back and inching them closer and closer to this fiery furnace. And they're thinking, okay, God, we really stood up for you here to challenge the king and everything. This is a really good time for you to do something amazing and zap everybody with lightning or just make this furnace disappear. And nothing like that happens. I mean, the doors swing open to this thing and the flames that leap out kill the guards that are pushing them in. And they're thinking, what in the world's going on here? And they get pushed into this fiery furnace. And once they're in there, it finally dawns on them, hey, I'm okay. Our clothes aren't burning. I don't even feel the heat. Guys, do you feel anything here? And who was in the furnace with them but their God? You see, that's the heart of Christianity. Christianity is you don't get saved and then have just this zippity-doo-dah happy little life forevermore after, right? Everybody know that song? Zippity-doo-dah, zippity-yay. Right? There's some people that think that's what Christianity is. Well, I'll just pray this prayer, then I'm just going to be skipping everywhere for the rest of my life. That ain't so. You've got some fiery furnaces in your future. You've got some dungeon episodes, 10 months of dungeon episode for some. Some people, 10 years of dungeon episode. Well, I don't think I've got it in me to handle 10 years. Well, you do if he gives it to you. Well, that doesn't seem all that fair, Pastor Philip. Well, I'm not making the rules. I mean, don't get mad at me. God determines what all of us can handle, and he says, these are places of refinement. And some of you can learn the lesson in 10 months, and some of you can learn it 10 minutes in a furnace, and some of you need 10 years of just a dry old wilderness. I mean, Moses had how many years in the wilderness? 40. 40? Pastor Philip, this is not encouraging, right? Some of you are thinking, that's it, I'm out of here. I'm going to go find me a church that tells me 10 minutes of discomfort and then it all gets great. Well, you can go to a church that'll tell you that stuff, but what are you going to do when life doesn't play out that way? You're going to get mad at the preacher and mad at the church and mad at their cute videos and happy little worship team skipping around on the stage and go, I feel a little betrayed by all of this, right? At least we're trying to tell you the straight truth here at Calvary Chapel. I don't know how long it's going to last for you. I don't. I mean, God hasn't given me any insight into how long it's going to last for any of us, including me, right? I have my episodes. I do. In one right now, really. But the key to it all is no matter what happens, I'm going to keep doing what I know is right. I will not trade off what I know is right for what I can't know. See, some people, they get all these questions like, I don't know what's going on, everything, and they just throw everything out. Stop. And they're failing the test. The test says, it doesn't matter. You can get mad and shake your fist at God. You can doubt everything and everybody. You can doubt your salvation. You can doubt whether God's listening in heaven. You can doubt whether anybody's real at all. You can do any of that and all of that, but you still get up and you still pray and you still have your quiet time and you still go to work and you still try and do the right things when no one's watching, right? Because that's what it comes down to. The Christian life is not a 40-yard sprint, you know. It's not this little, 10-yard dash, right? It is a marathon. It is a grueling, daily, up and down, up and down, up and down. And listen, there are moments when we all want to just throw in the towel and say, I just can't do this anymore, God. Isn't it amazing how God shows up when we get in those desperate moments? And he says, hey, let me take you by the arm and let me carry you a little bit farther. You know, we've all heard the poem about the footprints in the sand, right? I think it ought to be, it ought to be an amendment to that. And instead of seeing one set of footprints, it ought to be, well, I see one set of footprints and I see this long trough-like path. Well, that's where I had to drag you kicking and screaming, says God, through this particular episode, right? Because we don't go easy with the Lord sometimes. So here's John the Baptist saying, whoa, no, why does this have to take so long? And he's waiting, and he's waiting, and he's waiting, and he's waiting. I was thinking about how a doctor's office is a place where you have to wait. Tragically, today, you go to the ER, you have to wait. I went with some stomach problems several months ago, whatever, and I was there for like 8 hours before I could see somebody. When you're doubled over in pain, it's like 8 hours feels like 80 hours, right? I mean, when you're waiting in a doctor's office, have any of you seen that commercial where the girl's getting the great internet, Wi-Fi reception, whatever, and the doctor will see her now, and she says, okay, tell him I'll be right with him. And the last scene is the doctor, is she coming yet? And his receptionist says, no, but you're next, okay? So it's like, wouldn't you like to put the shoe on the other foot, right? I mean, how come everybody else can make their appointments, but not doctors? What's wrong with these guys? I'm sorry. But none of us likes to wait, especially when we're hurting. And that's what John is going through. That's what some of you are going through. You're waiting and you're hurting while you're waiting. Now, God didn't put this episode in His Word for no reason at all. He put it here to give us hope, so we would keep on, keeping on. Well, let's see what happens next. John says, what in the world's going on? Is he really the guy or whatever? And verses 4 through 6, Jesus doesn't make it easy at all. He says, go and tell John the things which you hear and you see. And he quotes from Isaiah 35 and Isaiah 29 and Isaiah 61. He just quotes some messianic passages here. He says that these messianic passages are being fulfilled right before everybody's eyes, and just go tell John all the stuff that you've seen. And even that's kind of ambiguous, isn't it? It's like, well, come on, Jesus. Why can't you just say, yes, I'm the Messiah. Go tell my cousin, I'm sorry things are not working out the way you thought they were going to work out. You're still the forerunner, but I'm the Messiah. And one day, a million years from now, it'll all be, great. This life is of it. He didn't say anything. He didn't give him an easy moment to believe it. Poor John is just struggling. And Jesus says, go and tell him all of this stuff. And verse 6, and blessed is he who is not offended because of me. That word offended in the Greek is the word scandalizo. Would you say that with me? Scandalizo. And we get the word scandal from that, right? But you know what it means? It means tripped up or stumbled. When there is a scandal, somebody is getting tripped up and the people around them are going to stumble over it, right? Scandals just knock everybody down. And Jesus says, listen, it's a great thing. It's a blessing for those who are not tripped up or stumbled because of me. In other words, we get upset that things don't work out the way we think God ought to do things. And even at that point, God doesn't say, well, I'm sorry, I'm not doing things the way you should do things. I know that your plan would be a lot better than my plan, says God, and I guess I could have this happen and this happen. Yeah. God doesn't say any of that, does he? He says, listen, there's a blessing for people that don't get tripped and stumbled over how I work, because I will never work in a way that you think I will or I ought to. I mean, how many times in my life I've said, God, I'm in this mess, and I've looked at it from every possible angle, and here's your options, A, B, or C. And God says, I don't like any of those options. I'm not going to do any of that. And he saves the day in a way that I couldn't ever have begun to imagine. And I look back and I think, wow, God, look at what you did here. And he smiles from heaven and says, yeah, and I didn't do it your way either, did I, Philip? Ow. Wow. It's easy to get stumbled over the way things play out. Verses 7 through 10, Jesus talks about John to his guys and to the people that are all around. He says, what was your interest and your attraction in John's ministry? He wasn't a reed shaken by the wind, meaning a pushover. He confronted a politician about his adultery. That's why he's in jail. He wasn't dressed up and seeking popularity and attention, says Jesus. He was a prophet, but he was actually super abundantly more than a prophet. He was the very forerunner of the Messiah, says Jesus. And then verse 11, assuredly I say to you, among those born of women, there has not risen one greater than John the Baptist. What? The greatest prophet of all time, says Jesus. And he never performed one miracle or sign. Isn't that something? He didn't call down fire from heaven. He didn't part the Red Sea. He didn't do any kind of an amazing kind of a thing. He pointed everyone to Jesus. He's the one that got to point everybody to Jesus. Guys, don't think it a little thing that you and I in this church age have this privilege and this responsibility to point people to Jesus. You and I are living in amazing times that we get to tell people about Jesus. Now, all of this would have been encouraging to John in his prison cell. But John didn't even know that Jesus is saying all of this, right? And the point that I want to make of that is to say, the Lord is bragging on some of you today that are fatigued from waiting on the Lord's will for a long, dry season in your life. You can't fathom that, but God is talking with saints in heaven. Perhaps he is talking to angels, and he's saying, hey, take a look at brother so-and-so or sister so-and-so. Check out how they keep on keeping on. Even though I opened them up to the enemy for a little while, I let the rain on them. I let the enemy sift them. And look at Mona Mitchell. She still gets up, has her quiet time, prays a prayer when she stands in front of the refrigerator. She keeps on keeping on. And the Lord's bragging in heaven. He is. Now, it would encourage us if we could actually hear that going on, right? Well, okay, I can go a little farther, I guess, God. Well, you're hearing it today. That's how he gets it through to you, through church and pastors and Bible studies and these kinds of things. Keep on keeping on. Your Lord is bragging on you to somebody in heaven. He's elbowing somebody saying, yeah, you thought you had it tough. Have you seen what I'm letting them go through? And they keep getting up and praying, and they're not backing down. They're not backing away. And the question I put in my notes, do we want to do great things for God, or do we want to point people to our great God? That's a big deal. That's the difference between John the Baptist and every prophet in the Old Testament, right? John didn't do great things for God. He pointed people to his great God. And you and I, we have a choice to make. Verse 11b, listen to this. But he who is least in the kingdom of heaven is greater than John the Baptist. What? Listen, say amen if you're still listening to me today. Okay. The only person that's ever been to heaven is Jesus, right? And Jesus is saying, listen, guys, everybody lean in close. I want to give you a heavenly perspective on something here, okay? John the Baptist is the most amazing prophet. I mean, wow factor. This guy got the best job of any prophet in the entire Earth Project era, the whole deal. John the Baptist is at the top of the list, right? However, the most baby, infantile, least person in heaven is way beyond John's capacity to understand. What? Yeah. The least person in heaven would blow the mind of the most brilliant Christian here. The godliest saint is stumbling in the dark compared to any of heaven's residents. I was asked this last week. Rick, we were talking about how are we going to recognize people in heaven and everything. Because we're going to have a new body and we're not going to look the same. We're going to know who everybody is without having to be introduced to anybody. When Jesus showed up at the Mount of Transfiguration, he showed up with who? Moses and Elijah. Did it say anything about them introducing themselves to each other? Hey, how you doing? I'm Moses. I was the Red Sea guy, and I was a little time in Egypt. That's why I look a little Egyptian. I walk like an Egyptian, right? He didn't. There was no introductions. There was nothing like that going on at all, right? No, there were no introductions. In heaven, everybody knows. I mean, I hate to use this word because it's not. I don't mean it literally, but compared to where we are now, it's like infinitely more intelligent than we are here. We will know everybody. Well, how are we going to know it? We're just going to know everybody. You ever met somebody and felt like you've met them before, you already know them, and you haven't? Well, imagine that a million times capacity. Everybody you meet, you just know them. See, because we're all part of the family of God through Jesus. We're all brothers and sisters when we get there. Well, what are we going to look like? Or how are we going to be recognized? Well, to my kids in heaven, they may look at me and they may see a guy with a beard and silver hair. But to one of my friends when I was back in high school, I may still have black hair and 165 pounds, and I don't know. What about a childhood friend? Well, they may see me as a 6-year-old. I don't know how. We may look different to your parents. They may see you as the sweet little kid that you were. Who knows? We may see the full range of all of it all at once. It's mind blowing, isn't it? I'm trying to blow your mind a little bit. I hope we are going to. It's so far beyond. Jesus says, listen, I've been on the other side. None of you have. And I'm telling you, the sharpest tack in the box on this earth is nothing compared to the most infantile up there. I mean, imagine what you're going to know the instant we breathe our last breath here and we're there. That's just mind-boggling. Mind-boggling stuff. In verses 12 through 15, Jesus blows their minds even more by talking about all this spiritual upheaval in the spiritual realm. He says, hey, it's a war zone right now in heaven. And you and I were like, wait a minute, I thought it was just robes and harps and eating grapes and floating around on clouds. No, that's not what heaven is about. Heaven is a place of spiritual warfare right now. At the time that Jesus is speaking, until now, there's all of this fighting between the good and the evil angels and everything. There are angels that have dominion over every city on the planet, over every leader of every nation. There are good angels and there are evil angels, and they are warring and they are fighting. And if you don't have any idea, you know what I'm talking about here, I challenge you to go to our library and get Frank Peretti's books on This Present Darkness or Piercing the Darkness. Great fictional reads that will open your eyes up to what's happening in the spiritual realm right in front of us. Because it's a war zone in heaven right now. In fact, it's going to continue to be a war zone until at least a half, if not two-thirds of the way into the Great Tribulation. Why? Because it is at that point that Satan and the evil angels are kicked out of the heavenly realm, and they're all on the earth. And that's when things get horrible on the earth, because they can't fight in the heavenly realm anymore. Right now, it's a war zone. War zone. Why all of this upheaval going on while Jesus is speaking? Because Jesus is saying, listen, guys, while I'm talking to you, we're on the cusp of a whole new era. We're about to go from law to grace, from the 69th and 70th weeks. I mean, we're just in the big pivotal point in history. Verses 16 through 19, Jesus takes a jab at the very people that he came and brought the gospel to first. Look at verse 16. But what shall I liken this generation? Like children sitting in the marketplaces and calling to their companions and can't be pleased. This generation of Jews, they could not be pleased. John's radical abstinence from all things normal gave him a reputation as a kook, as a possessed fellow, right? And then Jesus, on the other end of the spectrum, he really mingled with ordinary folks, and they called him a drunk and a glutton and a friend of the worst lowlives. So obviously he must be one himself, right? Now, if you hang around with a lot of riffraff, it's not long before somebody says, well, you may be a little riffraff yourself there. You're awful comfortable around the riffraff, right? Now, you know that's true, isn't it? That's why some of you won't hang out with me too much. You're afraid someone might think you're like me. I don't know. That's the silverback gorilla. He's a little wild up there. I don't want people to think I'm like that, right? The principle of association, remember? We've talked about it in Proverbs. We become like those that we associate with, therefore we choose our associations very carefully. And if you don't think that that's a true thing, listen, when your kids get old enough, they start hanging around with some kids that you don't think are decent kids, which happened to probably my kids, right? I'm just kidding, right? But listen, I don't know if you should hang around with Timmy. I don't know about Timmy. Timmy seems like he's a little bit of trouble. Trouble Timmy, right? Stay away from Tim. Timbo. Tim the man. Stay away from Tim. And the same thing is true at work. You go to work and you got this new exciting job, and there's critical Carrie that works in the cubicle 2 down from you. What do you avoid critical Carrie? I don't want to hang out with you. That'll mess with I don't want to have a bad attitude at work. I don't want people to think that I'm the reason morale is bad. We stay away from critical people. We stay away from trouble people. Why? Because we know that if you hang out with people long enough, you become like them. And here comes Jesus on the scene. He says, John the Baptist, this guy lived out in the desert. I mean, this guy, he was off the grid. You guys thought he was kind of crazy and everything. And then I come and I'm exactly opposite of him. I hang out with anybody that says you want to come over to eat. Now you think about it. It's kind of funny. Is there one instance in which somebody invites Jesus over for dinner and Jesus says, I don't like roast beef. I don't think I'm coming. He came to every dinner appointment that was thrown at him. I mean, anybody could say, listen, I got some Spam and some peanut butter cups, and we're going to, And Jesus would say, you know what? I don't know what Spam is, and I made everything. I'm God, right? But I'm coming for some Spam. He didn't turn down a meal with anybody. And because Jesus didn't say no to anybody, they said, you must be a lowlife yourself because you hang out with lowlifes. That should give us a little encouragement today, shouldn't it? I mean, if you think that you're too bad a person for God to hang out with, you don't have a clue. God says, I'm right at home with you guys. I love you. He loves it when we invite him over for dinner. Have you invited the Lord to have a meal with you in a while? I'm not talking about blessing your meal. You ought to bless your meal before you eat. We've done that. Our entire married life, we've done that. We still have to get under the kids every time. Don't eat. Put that fork down. Stop. What are you doing? We bless this before we eat it, right? Any of you ever had to do that before? Kids, you're praying with one eye open because they're popping a chicken nugget in their mouth, their little bird mouth, I'm not talking about blessing the meal. I'm talking about inviting God into your house, at your table. See, some of you live alone and you get tired of being alone. You can say, Lord, would you eat a meal with me today? And he'll show up. He'll show up. No, not in the physical presence, and you know what I'm saying. Invite him. He loves to say yes to dinner appointments. You don't have to ever eat a meal alone again. Ever. Jesus says, you guys are unresponsive and you're unreachable. John came, you didn't listen to John. I came, you won't listen to me. They were just hard-hearted. And we shouldn't be hard on ourselves that we can't reach somebody. You share the truth, nothing happens. And Jesus says, I know exactly how you feel. Man, I came, but the Jewish people, that was my kin. That was my brothers and sisters, my homies, right? And I couldn't talk to them, right? When you and I say, I can't talk to this sister that's opposed to the gospel or whatever, God says, I know exactly how you feel, right? But Jesus says, hey, wisdom is justified by her children, meaning the offspring or the fruit. It's the lasting fruit, not the momentary popularity that proves the authenticity. I've been in the ministry almost 20 years now, and I can tell you, there have been a lot of churches that have popped up and given themselves this advertising slogan, we're the fastest growing church in such and such. Well, I don't know if it's a good thing to be the fastest growing something as far as churches go. I'd rather say I've been in the community longer than anybody else. And when I left Murfreesboro, I looked around the community of faith. There were not many pastors in that town that had been in that town longer than I. I just kept plowing and plowing and plowing and plowing and plowing. Never reached that pinnacle of popularity. Never could boast we're the fastest growing. Listen, we're not selling frozen yogurt here. You understand that? That's not what we're about here. We're not trying to be the most popular or the quickest or the coolest or what. And that's not what we're after at all here. We're after lasting fruit. Now, I'll tell you what, God's doing some cool stuff at Calvary Chapel, Pensacola. The pre-service, the pre-teaching video that Calvin showed you this morning, do you know that that's the first video that I showed? Anybody remember that? When I first got here, I was being literally assaulted with modesty people that you have to dress a certain way. You need to get onto these people. You need to stop that. You need to put it. And there was a spirit-quenching kind of an uptightness. And I don't say that critically. It's just it's a matter of fact now, years later. And I showed this video to say, we want anybody to come. We're the church where anybody can come. If we're going to brag about one thing, we're not going to brag that we're the best or the quickest growing or whatever. We're the church where we don't care what you look like, how you dress. You come to Calvary Chapel, there's a place for you here. And I played that as the first video, knowing that there were folks here that just didn't get. That's what Calvary Chapel is about. It's a grace place. And we played it several weeks in a row. And I kept thinking, Lord, are these people watching that video? Do they not get what we're after here? I'm not going to come down on people over their wardrobe every week. We'll be majoring on the minors, which inevitably leads to minoring on the majors. It's happening in churches all across America. We don't want to minor on the major stuff. We want to major on the major stuff, which means all the minor, just let it go. Right? Can we have coffee in here? Yes. Let it go. Can we sit at round tables? Yes. Let it go. I mean, Wendy had the idea to change the name of the church to Calvary Cafe, put nothing but tables and serve food. I'm telling you what, that is a hit idea right there. I don't know when we can do that and get our waiters and waitresses together and listen. You guys could be sitting over a nice hot pizza while I'm teaching a Bible study. That's a killer idea. Calvary Cafe. That might be on a t-shirt or a bumper sticker one day. Right? But I'll tell you what, somebody will be upset. Well, that's not the way we've always done things. And I don't think church is supposed to be that way. And I don't agree with this. And how come we can't do that? Quit majoring on the minor stuff. It doesn't matter. Blessed are the flexible, for they shall not break. Just stay loose and relaxed and let the Spirit of God show up and do what only He can do. Jesus showed up and He didn't look anything like what these uptight religious folks were looking for. They couldn't hear a word He had to say. Well, maybe we ought to try and be a little bit more like Jesus. In other words, if people are a little upset because we're doing some things that are a little contemporary and different from everybody, well, maybe we're on the right track, right? If nobody's ever upset about anything, maybe we ought to relook at this deal here. I'm not saying we're looking for reasons to make people upset, but you understand where I'm going with that, right? We're looking for fruit, not popularity. We're looking for true authenticity. Verses 20 through 24. I'm running out of time here, but Jesus began to rebuke the cities in which most of His mighty works had been done. What? What happened to gentle Jesus? I thought Jesus was gentle. I thought Jesus just liked everybody and was just nice all the time. No. Jesus, He began to upbraid these places. What in the world does upbraid mean? It's the word onadizo, and it means to rail at, to chide, and to taunt. Jesus is railing at, He's chiding at, He is taunting all of these cities where He did all of this amazing stuff. What? You see, we think seeing miraculous signs and wonders changes lives. And Jesus says, hey, wait a minute. All these cities that I'm naming, they've seen me work miracles. And the fact that they're still going to be judged, having experienced all of those miracles, reveals miracles doesn't make people believe. Entire cities in hell where there's different degrees of punishment. That's interesting, isn't it? See, we think of hell as a place where people that reject the gospel of Jesus Christ are thrown into, cast into. But here Jesus says, listen, hell's a lot bigger than you can imagine. And I'm telling you, entire cities are going to be thrown into that place of torment. A little whistling phone there. Anybody know what that was? Andy Gert. Thank you, Tam. I was sharing this with the guys in prayer earlier today. I was teaching through the book of Romans back at Calvary Chapel, Murfreesboro, years ago. And I was about 20 minutes into my Bible study when my phone began to ring. And I pulled the phone out and I looked, and it was Tammy, my wife. In the South, you don't always begin by stating who you are and all this. We begin with a question. As I answer the phone, I say, hello, and Tammy says, what are you doing? And I said, I'm 20 minutes into my Bible study in Romans. Everybody say hi to Tammy. Everyone went, hi, Tammy. She said, well, it was late, and I wanted you to know we're not there because the kids are sick and everything. And so, phones ring. It's not a big deal, right? We just keep right on moving with it. Where was I? Well, what's going to be the fate of our cities? What's going to be the fate of our cities which have Bibles in every home, but rarely ever read? See, you and I, we have been exposed to more Bible teaching, more of the gospel than most places on the planet. It's been a while back that I showed this video of Chinese house church Christians getting a box of Bibles. And when they opened the box, some of you have seen this video, they began to weep and hug these Bibles and kiss them and cry. And it's convicting when you see Christians on the other side of the world, the way they respond to the Bible. And they take those Bibles and they tear them into 66 individual books. And they hand them out, and everyone writes them in their own handwriting, a book of the Bible. Then they pass that to someone else. And there's some churches that may spend the next 20 years with nothing but the New Testament letter to the Philippians. That's all they have. That's all they've heard. That's all they know. And they just cherish it, and they cherish it, and they cherish it. Meanwhile, in America, we all have Bibles all over the house. You can get a Bible listen, because my wife loves thrift stores and yard sales, I'm telling you, I have never been to a thrift store or a yard sale that I didn't see a Bible for sale for 25 cents to $1. There's no excuse for anyone in America not having a Bible. If you can't afford one, you can walk into a hospital room, a hotel room, you can grab a Gideon Bible. They don't mind you stealing them. I thought I was stealing one in Paris, France years ago, and they leave them there. And I thought it'd be cool to have a Bible written in French, so I stole it. And somebody stole it from me. Can you imagine that? I mean, we can get Bibles anywhere in America, right? They're everywhere. What kind of a judgment do you think awaits a nation that has Bibles just stacked everywhere, collecting dust on coffee tables, getting sunbaked in the back window of the car for a week because you only take it out when you come to Calvary Chapel? The rest of the week is just sitting baking in the window back there. I mean, listen, we have been exposed to so much, and Jesus says, listen, there's a different kind of fate for cities that have been exposed to me and my gospel. Entire cities, perhaps even nations, thrust into this place that you and I call Hades or hell. Well, verses 25 and 26, at that time Jesus answered and said, I thank you, Father, Lord of heaven and earth, that you've hidden these things from the wise and prudent and have revealed them to babes. Even so, Father, for so it seemed good in your sight. He rejoiced, according to another gospel account, that the Father revealed these things to the babes, the least, instead of brilliant people. And we understand the Trinity perhaps better than some of these folks because we've got the whole counsel of God. But we understand far less, in my estimation, than the Puritans did. I mean, these were people that were so serious. If you've ever read the prayers of the Puritans, I'm telling you, there are people. They had a depth in their relationship with the Lord. But we're all at these different stages, aren't we? And we're all going to be learning more about Him forever. We'll never know Him like He, the Son, knows the Father, and like the Father knows the Son, and all of this. We're all at different stages of all this. But the Lord still loves to lay all this on the least. He loves to lay it on the least. What I love about Calvary Chapel as a movement, listen, I guess I'm a company man. This is a great movement of God. It's getting older now. There's a lot of guys with hair the color of mine in this movement, But I'll tell you what I love about Calvary Chapel. The pastors of Calvary Chapels have come from all walks of life. I mean, some of them were homeless when they came to Christ. Some of them, dyslexic, still can't read. They have to have their elders read the Bible to them, and they've memorized entire books of the Bible because they can't read like you and I read. Some of them have an elementary education. That's where they got, they stopped, and then they got into all this trouble and everything. Then they came to Christ. Some of them finished high school by the skin of their teeth. Some of them got a little college under their belt. Some of them, very few of them, got all of the Bible college and the seminary training. I went to a Southern Baptist University for a little while, and most of them didn't even have what I have, right? And why would God call, a bunch of primitive barbarians to be leaders of a movement that don't have any of the credentials of organized Christianity? Why would he do that? So he wouldn't be robbed of his glory. See, God can use you because he can use me. And God says, I love to use people that the world says are not usable. I love to work in situations that people look at it and go, how in the world, how did that guy become such a student of the Bible? I mean, he's not all that sharp. He didn't finish this, he didn't finish that. Why? Because God gets all the glory in it, you see. God still loves to lay all of this stuff on the babes instead of the brilliant. Maybe you don't think of yourself as a babe. We use that word differently today, don't we? We don't think of a babe as infantile. We think of a babe as, oh my goodness, she is so hot. Babe, right? Well, maybe you don't think of yourself as a babe, but in God's eyes, you are. You are. And he loves to work through you if you're just a willing vessel to be used, you see. He came and he brought all of this to people that we would never imagine him picking. And the last little passage of Scripture, verses 28 through 30, he talks about coming and taking my yoke upon you, right? And the word come there in Greek, it means to believe. It means to receive. It means to eat and to drink and to confess. He says, come and believe and receive and eat and drink and confess to me, Jesus. It's interesting. He doesn't say, come to a church. God is not going to ask you what your religious affiliation is when you stand before him one day. You don't go to the front of the class because you were in this or you were in that. He doesn't say come to a church. He says come to me. He doesn't say come to a creed. He says come to me. He doesn't say come to a pastor. Pastors can't save you. If you were to ask me if I think you're saved, I'm looking around the room, I think you're all saved. Now, I love you, and because I love you, I see, I see the best in you. I haven't always been that way, but I tell you, that's the way I am these days. I really see the best. I love you, and I think you're all saved. But I don't know everything. And God isn't going to say, well, Philip, can you vouch for him? He's going to look into your very heart one day, and he's going to say, do I see my son Jesus indwelling in that life? Not did you come to a pastor or a creed or a church, but did you come to Jesus himself? And I'm convinced in a room this size, as every Sunday is the case, there's somebody that hasn't come to Jesus yet. They've come to a church, they've come to a creed, they've come to a pastor, but they've never come to Jesus. And you need a come to Jesus moment, right? If you don't know where we are in the Bible study, here's where we are. This is your opportunity to really come to Jesus. Doesn't matter what your mother believed. Doesn't matter that your grandfather was the deacon, that he helped build the church. Doesn't matter all the stuff that you've done in churches in the past. He's not going to ask you about your performance, right? This is about a relationship with Jesus himself. There's somebody in this room this morning. You have not truly come to Jesus. And Jesus says, are you burdened? Well, yeah, I'm burdened. Well, maybe you're burdened because you haven't come to Jesus yet. Quit convincing yourself that you're something you're not. And accept where you really are so something can change. Jesus says, are you burdened? Then come to me. Well, I had to define burden, Pastor Philip. Well, I mean, nothing's working. You got problems everywhere. Strife, conflict. Life is just like pushing water uphill. It's just everything feels futile. I feel like I'm just constantly gritting my teeth in my own strength, and I'm faking it. And I feel like I'm faking it. I feel like I'm trying to fake it in front of everybody else and act like I'm happier than I am, that I'm more whole than I am. But my life is a burden. If your life is a burden, he says, you've come to a church, maybe you came to a pastor, maybe you came to a creed, but you have not yet truly come to me. And you need to take my yoke upon you, says Jesus. And we read those words, we think, what yoke? What is this talking about, eggs or something? What is a yoke here? Well, this is not talking about eggs. This is talking about how they would take a pair of oxen, and they would yoke them together to this plowshare kind of a thing. In other words, when Jesus says, take my yoke, he's saying, you need to link up with me. See, the problem with some false converts that have come to a church, a creed, or a pastor is they have never linked up to Jesus. In fact, up until this present moment, they're still asking God and Jesus to link up with them. I'm not changing to suit you. You lower your standards, God, and accept all the stuff that I think is right and wrong and everything in between. You join me instead of me joining you, right? He says, link up with me, join me, not the other way around. And he says, learn from me. That means you have to start with a teachable heart and attitude. If you think you know everything and you can't be told anything, you're not even ready to come to Jesus. Now, I never experienced this in the room. I'm telling you, as I'm looking at your faces as I'm teaching you every week. I see teachable, responsive hearts. That's what I see with my eyes. Now, I can tell you the early years of ministry, that wasn't so. I didn't know anything. I was young. I remember having a professor from Trevecca University sitting in a service one Sunday morning. His arms were crossed like this. And the entire Bible study that I was teaching, which was a horrible Bible study looking back, but the whole Bible study, he shook his head no. The whole time. Finally, I wasn't teaching anybody but that one professor. By the end of that, it's like, come on, man. I'm saying something true, aren't I? I kept trying to convince him. He was completely unteachable, unresponsive. All these years later, I look around the room, I see responsive hearts. Some of you have been followers of Christ longer than me, but you're still teachable. You have teachable hearts. The people that are false converts, you know who they are? They're the ones that smile at me as if they're teachable, but really the only thing they ever accept that I say is something that they already believe. It's called an itching ears type of teaching. Well, you'll meet me at the door and you'll say, well, that was great today. And what you really mean to say is, you restated everything I already believe in a really clever way, and I knew you were a sharp guy because you believe just as I believe. What? Hey, that's not a teachable heart. Teachable heart says at one point or another, you're going to hear something you don't like. You never believed it before, but the Spirit of God and the Word of God confirm it, and you reject, renounce your preconceived notions and biases, and you say, God, I reject all that I've brought in, and I accept this as truth because it's your Word and your Spirit is saying it. Do you have a teachable, responsive heart? Some of you, you've been used and abused by everyone in this world. Jesus says, I'm gentle, I'm lowly in heart. You will not get hurt if you link up with me, Jesus, he says. But others have hurt me. Jesus won't hurt you. You'll find what you really seek more than happiness, more than pleasure, more than money, more than relationships, more than popularity, more than fame. You'll find rest for your soul. There's some of you, and listen, I'm talking to young people too. You need rest for your soul. Rest. Rest is a gift. It's the rest of what we call salvation. That rest that you long for, it can only be found in Jesus. That's what weary sinners long for more than anything. When someone authentically puts their faith and trust in Jesus Christ, not church, not pastors, not creeds, but I mean really give it to Jesus. You know what? I hear this all the time. It's like all of the weight of the world was lifted off of me. And if you feel that, you know what you were feeling in that moment, that sensation? You were feeling rest. I don't have to carry it all anymore. He'll carry it. I don't have to choose which direction to go. I'm linked to Jesus, you see. Every yoke was made for and perfectly fitted in that day for a lead ox and a follower ox. The follower ox, all he had to do was follow the lead ox. But it means we let go. I can't figure out what to do next. Let him lead. I don't know what to do about my kids. Let him lead. I don't know what to do about this financial situation. Let him lead. I don't know what to do about these feelings that I'm having right now. Let him lead. If you're linked to him, it's a light. It's just a joy if we let him lead. Do you know when we get exhausted and frustrated? When we try to lead, and inevitably we're trying to go this way, and Jesus is saying, we're going this way. And all of a sudden, we're going this way against our will. And we dig our little oxen hooves in, don't we, right? When Jesus is going off to this way, we're like, no, I want to go that way. And we actually think that we can pull God to go our way. And he says, who do you think you are? You're a follower ox. I'm the lead ox. And you know when you have peace again? It's just like when you first came to Jesus. You stop going against him and you get in the direction he's going. You say, I'm going with you now, Lord. And then there's joy. There's no stress and anxious and all of that. Some of you are followers of Jesus, but you've been fighting the yoke. Some of you need to begin that relationship with Jesus today. And now we're at the moment. You get to accept or reject what you've heard. Well, I don't know what I want to do. I'm young. I've got all the time in the world. No, you don't. Today is the day of salvation. We heard it in Jim's testimony. Nobody in here is promised tomorrow. Kids, listen to me. There's not a child that can hear the sound of my voice that is promised tomorrow. Yeah, but I think I'm going to live to 60, 70, 80 more years because I look around the room. There's 60, 70, 80-year-old people in this room. Listen, nobody is promised tomorrow. Nobody. Everybody in this room, today could be the last time you have to sit through the old Silverback's messages, right? And this could be the last one you hear. Are you the real deal today? Have you really committed everything to the Lord Jesus? Have you come to Jesus yet? Have you linked up with Him and let Him carry the load that is your life? Now's your chance. And if you choose to do nothing, that's a decision. Isn't it? That's a decision. So I'd like you to bow your heads.